Hello, my name is Laura Joseph from Healing with Spirit. Welcome to episode 3 of Triggers in Spiritual Medicine. I am so excited today to be having Sue Andrian here, who I have known, God, seems like forever. And yet we kind of lost touch for many years, but our paths kind of paralleled, I think, over the last 30, 40 years. And so I'm really excited. Sue Andrian is, I'm going to let you talk about you, but what I really
Okay.
love is like what you're doing, Hope Reimagined. So Sue's going to be talking about what she's doing and Hope Reimagined, which is basically a mental health and educational support services organization. And I love a lot of the things that she's doing around neurosequential models and neurophysiology, especially when it comes to trauma. And how this bridges on what we're doing, what some of the focus that I kind of envision is really to be a catalyst to show others the way to become the solution to breaking the cycle of the epidemic perpetuated of unhealed, unresolved, unacknowledged trauma in all facets of our life, not just human life, but our planet and all the intricate sequences that are involved in there. So this is basically a new collaborative program where we're bringing in different industry experts and survivors who have figured out how to heal these effects of their trauma or whatever they're doing in their professional lives by breaking free from those chains that basically bind us down from really truly living in a way in society that is truly possible. So welcome, Sue. Tell us about Hope Reimagined and what is it about? What got you into this? How did you get started? All these good things.
Yeah, it's so funny because to hear Sue too, because I go by Susan now, but everyone who knew me as a kid
Right.
calls me Sue. So it's totally great. But I do usually go by Susan now. It's like
Sorry.
my childhood name. That's funny. Yeah. So Hope Reimagine. I've been working in Oakland, California. I'm currently in Oakland, California, and I've been here since 1998. When I graduated from UMass Boston, from the College of Public and Community Services, I started working in Brockton, which is kind of there were some similar demographics to here in Oakland. And I was working in I was running a community center in low-income housing. And I think that's where I really started to recognize the complexities of the way that trauma was so insidious in the way that it was pervasive in the experiences that the young people and the families that I was working with, and really started to connect with the importance of relationship and how key that was into whatever it was that I was doing. And so that really influenced me a lot. And my current husband and I moved from Massachusetts to Oakland in 1998. So I've been here for a minute now. And when I got here, I started working in schools and I started at a small charter school that was intended to be this project-based, arts-based elementary school. It's a really fabulous group of people who started it with a lot of grand ideas. And then when they opened the doors, the kids that came in the building just had so much trauma. And the adults, me included, we really weren't prepared to give them what they needed to be able to feel safe and to learn. And each day it became more and more clear that we were out of our depth and we were causing more harm to the kids and family in the building because our attempts to have this free spirited space to explore, which I still really believe in, but the other pieces to it, the ability to regulate their nervous system, the lack of ability to feel safe and connected, and structure. So that experience, seeing how challenging it was and that I really was ill prepared, it inspired me to go back to school and get my master's degree in psychology to have a deeper understanding. And when I graduated from the New College of California, which was a pretty progressive school here in San Francisco, unfortunately for financial reasons, they've closed, which is a bit of a theme in my career here. But I started at a middle school in Oakland It was 99% Black students, African-American students. Most of the students that were not Black were Middle Eastern newcomer students who had their own classroom and often didn't want to leave that classroom because there was an issue of relationship and safety. My first day as a therapist was September 11th, 2001. And as we know, that was a really big day. But that day I was like, oh my goodness, what do I do? How do I support the kids? And when I got there, I realized that the kids were like, what? Who cares? Our life, nobody cares about us. Nobody's gonna bomb us. Our lives are like this every day. And I spent 5 years at that school, and I worked for an organization called Lincoln Child Center. And our model, we took kids out into community. We took kids camping. We included art and music and dance in the milieu, as well as what was happening in the clinical office and my therapy space and meeting with parents. And from very early on in my clinical career, I knew what was healing, and it wasn't necessarily the 50 minutes that I was doing in my therapy office, right? It was all these other opportunities for healing experiences and relational experiences for the kids that I was working with. From there, I went to that school closed, and I transitioned to another middle school, which is one of the more affluent schools in Oakland. It's a very diverse community, 19 different languages spoken, high academic achievement, and the disproportionality was really clear while I was there, that some kids were doing really well and that a lot of kids really weren't, and most of those students were students of color. And then I started to get into restorative justice. I was trained by Rita Alfred, who is the founder of Restorative Justice Training Institute, and started to shift my practice from even more so from the individual therapy model that I was trained in, this clinical psychodynamic sit down and talk to kids model, to a collective community healing process, and found that to be, for one, the humility, the hubris to say, me as this white kid from Hingham is going to go into Oakland and sit with a kid for 50 minutes once a week and provide what they need for healing the intense, deep intergenerational trauma that they've experienced. It just felt like that's ridiculous, right? That's not respectful to a community. And so
it's also our privilege, right? It's our privilege.
Totally.
We don't even know like what it goes through if we have privilege. And sometimes we don't even know what privilege looks like because we've never, and I think this is something that's a whole nother topic that we could have a whole other show on, right?
Yes. Totally.
But yeah.
So I as I started to be trained in restorative practices and see the healing value of restorative practices and restorative justice, I got super excited and was like, the whole school is going to be restorative justice, and moved so fast that I moved at a pace that the community wasn't ready for, and learned my first lesson in like, you need collective buy-in to be able to do collective healing. And so each of these experiences influenced and started to grow the depth of my understanding of the neurodevelopmental and what is healing, and from a neurological and physiological perspective, what really is healing. And can
you define what that looks like?
So in the last 5 years, I've been training with Dr. Bruce Perry in the Neurosequential Model. And what this model really helped put in perspective for me, so many of the things that I was experiencing as a clinician around what's healing, he was able to create a heuristic and a model that applied the science to what my experience had been. And it was really like this aha. And so some of the key concepts are that we develop sequentially, right? So that that there are windows of sensitivity. So what happens in those first few months of life has a greater impact than what happens later. And that when two co-occurring things happen with enough repetition, they become intertwined, right? So when we think about attachment is this experience of I'm in physiological distress. I'm hungry. I'm tired. My diaper's wet, whatever it is. My caregiver picks me up, looks at me, relieves the physiological distress, and provides loving relationship. Right. So that happens with enough repetition that those things become intertwined, and we start to experience relationship as rewarding and healing and valuable. If there are gaps in that, or if those early relational experiences are intertwined with a depressed parent or an alcoholic parent or an overwhelmed, working single parent that just doesn't have enough energy and time to be attuned, attentive to the baby, that there becomes this gap in what's rewarding in terms of relationship, and we experience the archetypal wounds that I think it's Michael Martinez, I don't want to get it wrong, but we experience these wounds that then become part of our neurophysiology. They're hardwired into our experiences. And they can't necessarily be undone, but we can provide other patterned repetitive experiences that then start to counterbalance those more harmful hardwiring that we have. And that
so you can maybe give like an example of what that looks like to somebody who may not have any clinical training or any of that kind of stuff.
So the Dr. Bruce Perry talks a lot about how do we change from a sensitized stress. So when we have a sensitized stress response system, we all have a catalog of experiences up into this day, right? I have a catalog of experiences. You have a catalog. We each have our own personal catalog of experiences that influence how we are experiencing the current moment, because our brains are wired in ways to make quick decisions about stuff, right? And the rhythm. So when you're in the womb, you're constantly hearing you're warm, you're cared for, you're fed, you're in this bubble of, in an ideal situation, you're in this bubble and you're hearing a constant heartbeat, right? So there's a heartbeat in the womb, ba-boom, 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 while you're growing these neural networks and feeling like safe. So that's why rhythm and heartbeat are so central to all of us, because it's hardwired from the very moment that we come into existence. So that's why we find rhythm and rhythmic experiences and engaging in rhythm, and rhythm is in everything, right? It's in the cadence in our conversation, it's in music, it's in drumming, it's in dancing. Right. And so when we bring rhythm into our healing practices, it taps into those ways in our body and our physiology that are natural ways of healing. So we always want to incorporate some rhythm into what we're doing.
I kind of see that when I was exploring, the whole neurofeedback, for some of the people that I work with, right? And versus like some of the therapies that I'm training out of Japan, and also incorporating traditional tuning forks and Tibetan singing bowls. And I found that people's agitation states sometimes stop within like 30 seconds, or switch with the right frequency and the right vibration, because it actually bypasses that blood-brain barrier, right? So it's like you can't think about it. It just is, because you're dealing with neurophysiology, right?
Right.
So
it's housed in the precortical part of the brain, right? And so it's exciting for me to think about. I've always known that these spiritual activities and then engaging in meditation or dancing or art are healing. And I don't want to take away from the spiritual aspect of it. And I know that that's really important to a lot of your listeners and a lot of the folks that you work with. And I find it fascinating, like, what's the science behind why this is working for us? Because that helps ground it in a way that's different.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm all about, it's not about, which we see sometimes in spiritual practice, which gets very woo-woo and kind of out there. And it's hard if you're dealing with somebody who's got a history of trauma, or somebody that's even got a history of trauma that might have some embedded religious beliefs, right?
Mm-hmm.
To get them to understand that this is beyond, like, Tibetan monks have been using this particular therapy, for instance, for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And to help mitigate X, Y, and Z, right? So when we understand that it goes more into the physiology, and you're right, it's like the rhythms and the vibrations and the frequency that we forget in science. I remember when I used to teach anatomy and physiology, I used to say I said to one of the doctors, I go, we teach all these body systems, but we don't teach the electrical conduction system to doctors, to nurses, to psychotherapists. And I go, and that's the system that is short-circuiting when we're dealing with crises and we're dealing with trauma. And it's the one system that professionals aren't trained in.
Right.
And it's also the one system that connects us to the soul, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And so when we start to understand the importance of rhythm, and then this understanding, this sensitized stress response system. So if our catalog of experiences is telling us the world is a dangerous place and you always need to be on alert, even small amounts of stress are going to activate our stress response system. We're going to become flooded with neurochemicals of norepinephrine, cortisol, and then our prefrontal cortex goes offline, and we go into these distorted survival states, and we're misinterpret what's happening. Where if we are, so the way to shift that, the healing part of it, is to provide moderate, predictable, and repetitive exposure to tolerable amounts of stress over a period of time. And that is a resiliency building pattern. And you can even think about it like when you go to the gym, right? If you like, I haven't been in the gym for 6 years and I'm going to go right back to where I was, lift do 5,000 squats. The next day you can't move. And it's the same kind of experience. And we don't set our kids up in schools or systems to be able to recognize what is the resiliency building dose of stress for this child. What is the resiliency building dose of stress for me? And then even the way we set up therapy in these once a week, 50-minute sessions, it is in a resiliency building pattern, right? So for kids, we need to give lots of doses of therapeutic experiences woven throughout the day through art, music, and relationship. How
thought about that
are we giving this child multiple doses?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was thinking like therapy, right? I think of therapy, and I always wonder, like, an hour for some people is not enough. Like you're just getting like to the crux of things. Then you go, okay, time's up. And you're like, okay, and then we got to start that cycle over again. And it's like, how do we go deeper into, helping, it's like, where's the healing piece? If we're going, okay, so how are you this week? Blah, 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 blah. By the time you get done with all the short stuff and you start getting into the deep stuff, it's like time to end.
Yeah. And for some people, it's too much in one dose, right? So we have to think about dosing and spacing. So
you're right.
For some people, they need more time to be able to slowly open up to that space and then effectively close down that space, right? So you're not, like, even in therapy, you can't be deep in the stuff for the whole time. It would overwhelm your nervous system, right? We have to build up to it, then we open up, and then we do some healing practice, and then we might touch on it again. But if it was all intense all the time, it can be re-traumatizing for some clients. And I think that happens.
And I think even like whether you're talking therapy,
right there,
or whether you're talking like healing arts, like what I do, I always say part of my job is to understand how my client is going to process something that we're about to do. Right. So you're right. It's like, I'm not going to go in and pull out all the tools that I know how to do to help you mitigate a trauma, right? Mm-hmm. Right out of the get-go, because I tell them, I go, I need to know how you're going to process something, because it's never what happens here. It's what happens at 2 o'clock in the morning when you're by yourself at home.
That's
and
right.
we already kind of open up a can of worms, and we have to reacclimate to our body. At least like some of the work I do, it's reacclimating and knowing how the body is responding to a particular trigger.
Right.
And then knowing how to mitigate that, right? And then it's knowing when to push, when to pull back, right? When to push and when to pull back.
Yeah. And how to weave that dose of activation with rest, activation with rest, activation with rest, in a resiliency building pattern. And our systems are not geared towards that.
Right. Right. Can
So
you share possibly like a story? Are you able to share maybe a story of an experience that you had with working with one of the kids or something like that? You know, as far as like how they came in and what were they experiencing and what worked for them?
So I think some of the most powerful work that I had with kids was camping. Right. Camping is this bringing kids from Oakland who, for many of them, had very little experience outside of the city, right? Or had never been to the ocean, had never been camping, had never been in the woods that much, you know, other than the parks. And we have some beautiful spaces here in Oakland. It's hard to imagine because it's so close, right? The redwoods are right there. My son and I go every morning hiking, or let's not exaggerate. We're at about 3 days a week, which is great, before work. But I took a group of middle school kids to Big Basin on a base camping trip, and then we met up with the elementary school kids at the end of the base camping trip. We did a ropes course, and then we went to the beach. And because it was over a period of time, and we had these moments of like intense stress, because it was all new. Novelty in of itself automatically activates your stress response system. And so we would have these moments of like playfulness, and then this is stressful, and then playfulness, and this is stressful, right? And it was like this weaving in and out of the day of hiking, and some moments were really hard for them, and some moments were really joyful for them. And then we get to the campfire and that evening. And now these are kids that I've been working with all year. They knew each other, and we're in nature. We're around a campfire. We've had these 2 days of sort of weaving in and out of good kinds of dosing of stress and relationship, right? And then we get to the fire, and I open up the space, and it's this incredibly cathartic healing moment of joy of what they've experienced. And then we close that out and come back. And we ended that trip with a ropes course. And there's a young woman who I'd been working with for a long time. And she was, you know, standing on the top of the pole, and you have to jump and catch the trapeze. And for her, I think my assessment of it was very symbolic, that jump, because she was an 8th grader. This is like about to go to high school, making a lot of choices. Her life was like she had a choice to go this way or this way. And she was up there for a good half hour before she jumped. And I just continued to support her and say, you know, you can do it. If you really want to come down, you can. But if you want to stay, we'll wait for you as long as you're ready. And she finally did it. And, you know, she's 30 now. And she's a successful in sort of retail. And she still reaches out on occasion. I have a lot of kids that still reach out to me on occasion. And I'm on a second generation now. I have lots of children of kids that I've worked with.
That's amazing. I mean, it reminds me of, I volunteered for a domestic violence retreat last year. I was one of the main, I guess, workshops that we offered for the retreat. But we actually did kind of like an obstacle course for the survivors. And It was amazing to watch them challenge their fears,
Mm-hmm.
challenge their, and to kind of connect like, geez, why am I afraid to do this? Or why this is silly, and then, but also the big thing that I noticed with survivors, they don't always get the support. So to
Right.
have all these women saying, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this, really
Mm-hmm.
helps some of them take that leap of faith, even though it was like just a
Mm-hmm.
small little pit, right? Of just like some fluff
Yeah.
balls on the bottom, but it was still like, and they're holding on to these bags and they're going, I don't know if I can do this, right? And then they have to go from one bag to the next bag, kind of like those shows you see like Wipeout and stuff on
Yeah.
TV,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, no, you can do this. And guess what? You did. You
Right.
did. You did
And they
it.
experience it in their full body, right there. It's not a like a breakthrough in talk therapy. It's a somatic, like sort of changing on your physiological, your muscle memory, every part of your being gets to engage in that healing.
Yeah. And speaking of the somatic stuff, can you talk about that? And what and why is that something that a lot of us don't know about
Yeah.
and why it's important?
Yeah. I'm co-facilitating a group right now of parents at one of the schools that I work at, of a book study of Resmaa Menakem's My Grandmother's Hands, which is healing racialized trauma from a somatic perspective. It's a really powerful book, and anyone who's interested in doing racialized healing for yourself, it's a process and a healing, a really powerful one. And this is the second or third time that I've gone through the book, first time on my own, and then now as a co-facilitator. So the somatic piece, like from the neurophysiological perspective, from the neurosequential model perspective, we have pre-cortical associations. And of course, there's Peter Levine's work and somatic experiencing, but we have these neural networks that are like I said at the beginning, when two things occur with either enough repetition or enough extreme,
Mhm.
it's stored in our physiological being, so that when we're activated, the stress response system kicks in, our thinking part of our brain goes off, our gut, which has almost as many neural networks as that really becomes more activated, and our heart rate changes, our body becomes flooded with neurochemicals that help activate the muscles, that help shift our physiological being to be able to survive running from a tiger. Or if it's so extreme, it completely shuts off to reduce pain. So when we think about dissociation or there's two continuums of activation.
Mhm.
There's the hyperarousal, which helps us with fight and flight, right? It helps us run fast and be stronger than we would if we're not in that response.
Kind of like
And
how we
then
can
there's
push somebody's car up, right?
yeah, totally, like the adrenaline, the norepinephrine, like all of those things that we're actually moving, increasing blood flow to the parts of the body that will help us physically survive things. And then there's a point of shutdown, which is the dissociative continuum. And our body has natural opioids. And so the body will then pump opioids like painkillers and shut off to protect us so that we don't feel things as much. Because the feeling are too intense. And so when we think about cutting as a form of regulation, people are like, why would you cut yourself? That hurts. But for folks that are on the dissociative continuum, or who are prone to dissociative ways of responding to stress and trauma, when they cut, their body releases small doses of opioids that are actually relieving of stress and trauma.
Yeah.
And in The Boy Raised as a Dog by Dr. Bruce Perry, one of the chapters with Raven, that she actually overdosed on her own body created opioids, one of his clients. So it's really an incredible thing that our body can do this.
Yeah.
So if we think about the pre-cortical ways that we protect ourselves, pre-cortical meaning it's moving so fast, it's happening without our thinking part of our brain being able to know what's going on. For example, this is an easy one people get. If you put your hand on a hot stove, you're pulling it off. But if you had to take the time to, well, that's hot and I need to pull, that would take a long time. And Bruce Perry talks a lot about this, right? That our pre-cortical associations, the things that move at such a rapid rate, they become stronger over time. So if we've experienced trauma, or for all of us, right, we're growing up and living in this country, in the United States, we're experiencing white supremacy. So there are all these pre-cortical associations that we're experiencing depending on what skin we're walking in the world and what cultural backgrounds we're walking in. And so our body incredibly creates these ways of protecting us. It's pretty awesome. But when the trauma's over, those stay with us and they start to become maladaptive and they prevent us from thriving and living in relationship, and they start to cause physiological harm. And that's why the ACEs study, and I'm sure many of your listeners know, adverse childhood experiences study done at Kaiser Permanente with 17,000 Kaiser patients show that with 3 or more adverse childhood experiences, and they have some categories that have been identified, that your increased rate of heart attack, cancer, diabetes, asthma, all of that is related. And it's because of the strain that the stress response system puts on our system. Or also from a somatic perspective, when we are hurt emotionally, our body responds as if we're being physically harmed, and inflammation increases. And that inflammation is really a way of our body protecting the hurt part, but it causes a huge strain on the system.
I actually have a part of my chapter in the book that's coming out next year where I talk about the rates and the percentages of cancer and autoimmune disease and all those things that are linked to basically unhealed, unresolved trauma. And it's kind of, I mean, I grew up with my father being an osteopath, so he always treated root systems. So I learned, like, you treat the root system, then, and then everything else resolves itself, right? But traditional healthcare is not trained in that model. It's trained in treating a symptom, not the root. And then we wonder, because I get clients all the time that says, I've done this and I do this and I do that and I take this medication and nothing seems to get better. And I just look at them like, it's because everything is being treated from a symptom standpoint, not a root standpoint.
Yeah. And that's the paradigm shift that so Hope Reimagined, really, I've started to wonder, this is my 20th school year in Oakland, working in Oakland Unified School District, along with doing other pet projects and things. But I've started to wonder, I was disappointed, to say the least, at the way that we did not reimagine or reorganized from the pandemic, that as an education system, and you can see it all over social media and articles and New York Times, and or ask any of your educator friends, this year is really hard. And I think it's really hard because we went back to the broken system we had before, right? We didn't take the opportunity to reimagine. And I don't want to give up hope, and I don't want to give up reimagining. I feel like I'm hoping we're in the age of Kali. I really, really hope that. And Kali is my favorite goddess, the goddess of destruction. I feel like we're in the depths of transformation and change. And I'm trying to stick with that optimistic view of things. I think the antidote to the ACEs study show that even more correlation with the number of adverse childhood experiences you had. The data shows that the number of healthy relational experiences you have throughout the day, or the number of positive, healthy relationships, counterbalances the ACEs score significantly. So even
Yeah.
more important is you may have all these adverse childhood experiences, but if you have a rich relational therapeutic web and experiences of positive relational experiences throughout your day as a child, like if I'm the teacher and I can provide that for kids, I can give them the experience of the antidote, the medicine being joyful relational sense of belonging and connection that's woven throughout that child's day. That's what we need to do.
So if you could give 3 tips or 3 things, whether to educators or to parents, of what they can do today to help be part of that paradigm shift, to be part of what you reimagine,
Mm-hmm.
what would that be?
The first is take care of yourself. An unregulated adult cannot regulate a child. If you do not attend to your own emotional distress and pain, it's really, really hard not to give that to your kids. So that's the most important. I think it's an ethical responsibility for educators to practice co-care, self-care, and it's really on the admin and the system to incorporate that into the daily activities of teachers, which is really hard right now. So, it's a really hard time to do that, but you can't heal kids if you're not regulated. You can't, no unregulated person can provide co-regulation for kids.
I kind of look at it, it's like your finger's stuck in an electrical socket. You can't talk clearly until somebody helps you plug it out.
That's right. Yeah, totally. The second would be, I had this newcomer teacher come to me for consultation, and at the school site. So newcomers are students that have been in the country 2 years or less. They're brand new to the country. Most of them have experienced, and even just coming to this country is traumatic. It's like all new and everything, the cultural shock. But for many of them, they've also have a immigration journey that is, and whatever caused them to leave their country of origin is really traumatic. So she came to me really overwhelmed, like, all these kids need therapy. What am I going to, we don't have enough there. We don't have enough for them. What are we going to do? And I just said to her, I asked her some questions. Do they talk to you? Do they share stuff? Are they doing well in school? Do they seem happy? Do they tell you what's going on? She said, yeah, they're really open, and they'll communicate about stuff kind of in class. They'll share it in their writing. They laugh with each other. They tell me when they're sad. And I said, you're providing them exactly what they don't need therapy. They need a loving therapeutic environment, which you're giving to them every day in that class. They feel safe. They feel connected. They're sharing in doses the experiences that they have, and they're sharing it in a way that feels safe for them. They're experiencing this positive relational, and they're being seen. That's what you can do. And she was like, and it just brought her stress way down. Like, okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Sometimes it's just validating the student, right?
More access to art, music, and dance. Mm-hmm.
The third part. You said,
yeah.
what? I'm sorry.
I'm providing
them. Out there.
Sorry, I think my internet might be a little. It's providing them safe, predictable, reliable, positive relational regard. Right? There's Bruce Perry has the 6 R's. It's relational, rhythmic, rewarding, respectful of family and child, responsive. Well, no, I gotta get that. I should know them now. I'm a little embarrassed. I always have them, but it's respectful of biology, recognizing their biology and understanding that, being rhythmic, have it be rewarding, have it be so that it's repetitive, right? That you're coming back again and again with the same positive regard over and over again, that you're bringing in relationship, that there's a structure to the day that's predictable and feels safe. Kids really need predictability and lots of repetition. Think about your toddler who wants you to read the same book over and over and over and over and over again. There's a neurological reason for that. And parents, same thing as teachers, find ways to take care of your affect management of the adult is really key. I could go on and on, but I think those are some key
I know,
ones.
like you're bringing up things like when I used to teach in college in Boston, and a lot of them were inner city kids and folks also that had faced immigration and a lot of trauma. And what I have found, sometimes when they're acting out, it's because they just need to be validated. Sometimes that's all they really need. You don't have to go, again, like we were talking about, like, what's their need, or how's their processing. I had a student once that totally spent 20 minutes of college time in a class talking about why she didn't have this, why they didn't have that, and I kept overcoming the objections with, this is what we need, this is what, how we do this. And then I was preparing midterm exams, and they came in and they just said, Miss Joseph, I just became homeless. And so working through trying to help them navigate that. And this person was a tough cookie. And I just said, why do I have a suspicion you've overcome a lot more than this? You've gone through a lot. You've had, like, this is the least of some of the things you've gone through. And they kind of chuckled and they said, yes. And so I gave them places to find shelter. And I just said, look, I'm gonna help you with making sure you get shelter, and I'm gonna let you leave class early. And I said, and if you ever tell anybody I'm letting you out without docking you for the time, I said, I'll never do you a favor again, And they did, and they got like a 95 on their midterm. And somebody was complaining about how I'm one of those teachers that doesn't give everybody A's, and I tried to explain that it's not. A job's not going to hire you for what you've got on your test. They're going to hire you for what you learn. And this girl stood up and said, you have no idea what kind of teacher you had. And I almost broke down crying because, you don't always even know what an impact you make on somebody else's life until
So you provided the supports without lowering the expectation of rigor. And I think that's such a key. It's like so key and such a hard thing to do, right? Oh, this young person, they're not kid, I guess they're in college, needs these supports, but I'm not going to lower my expectations for them. I'm just going to break it down into manageable doses of stress that will support them to accomplish the full goal. And what each person needs is a little different. There's one more key concept that I think is pretty complex, but I think really, really important. People get wrong a lot because we're always promoting relationship. Relationship is so important, telling teachers to center relationship, and it absolutely is. But when we understand trauma and the intimacy barrier is a boundary that each of us has, and based on our relational, our catalog of experiences, our intimacy barrier is going to be more sensitized or to less sensitized. And so for someone who has a very sensitized intimacy barrier, even small casual relational contacts are going to be triggering, are going to feel intrusive and overwhelming. And so we have to be really attuned to where is that boundary for each individual person that we're interacting with. And when they build up enough trust, that person will invite you across their intimacy barrier. And when you're invited across, that's when you can do real connection. But if you're like trying to push your relationship building on someone who's not ready, they're going to find it intrusive and their guards are going to go way up. So I often see teachers and parents who are being reunited with their kids, right? They've been separated due to child protective services. The parent did everything they needed to do to get their life back together. They're working real hard on it. They see the kid. They're like, I love you so much. I love you. I'm so happy to see you. And the kid's like, whoa, right? Their guard goes up. So teaching how to be parallel, how to be present and parallel and show up and wait for that natural safety or bond and relationship to be there.
But also asking permission, right? It's asking permission.
And asking permission.
Yeah. I mean, like I had a student once that didn't get the services they needed in a domestic violence case. And the spouse was incarcerated for assault and battery. And because they didn't get the services to help the children, one of the children got themselves in trouble. And so in helping them, I could see that they really needed some emotional support. And I just said, and I know, I'm like, okay, you're not supposed to do this. I go, but I said, is it okay if I put my hand on your shoulder? Just to kind of say like, that there is like a healing touch, but I wouldn't do it without permission and just say, oh, let me just hug you,
Right.
And not everybody feels safe with that. And especially since we do have teachers that cross boundaries, right?
Yeah.
That don't understand what that boundary looks like. It is a delicate balance of maintaining professional relationship, but also understanding that sometimes just a hand on the shoulder can be enough that they go, you care. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And kindergartners and first grade, they need like it's so heartbreaking to me when we get to this like, oh, to protect the kids, we have a no touch policy. That's as harming. It's not as harming, but it can be extremely harming. So how do we help give teachers and educators and coaches? We want to make sure our kids are safe from folks who cross boundaries inappropriately, but we also want to make sure kids are getting the healthy touch that they need in order to be in relationship and heal, and also have a new experience of touch that is positive, that is respectful, that is gives them, it's life-giving.
And there's every, like, I think indigenous culture that's out there, and various healing modalities, alternative therapies, and science has been studying it, right? Even with Carillion photography, that touch is healing. And if it's done in the right, appropriate manner, right? So I think that's the thing, because I even see it in my industry where there's a lot of inappropriate behavior, and it really lies in the boundaries.
Yeah.
It lies in the communication. It lies in, I have a friend of mine that's in episode 1, who's a specialist in conscious consent, and who talks a lot about that and is a focus, and especially focusing on men who aren't always trained in what a boundary looks like, and because, that paradigm and what consent looks like.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that this is the next, like, really, really getting nuanced, helping folks understand that putting more attention on boundaries in ways that are more complex and nuanced than we tend to love binaries in this country, and it's not a binary. It's more fluid than that, and we have a responsibility to be attuned and be respectful and ask permission.
How can folks find out more about your work? Is there a website or something that they can find you?
Yeah, they can go to my website. It's called hopereimagined.org. Hopereimagined.org. They can also listen. I have a podcast myself. It's called The Awakening Educator, and I'm a co-host with Megan Sweet. And Megan we've had a lot of fun. This is our 3rd year in the podcast. We've had some amazing guests. We just launched one today that is with Lois Letchford about trauma and reading. She's so fun. She was such a fun guest. So check out The Awakening Educator. If you like it, rate it, download it, be really helpful. Megan comes from more the operations and academic perspective, and then I come from the trauma healing perspective. And so we try and bring that perspective. We've had some amazing guests, including Dr. Bruce Perry on our show. So
that's incredible. I mean, just to be able to tap into listening to Bruce Perry and Dr. Bruce Perry, I mean, that's incredible. I mean, I've been fortunate to sit in a few of his trainings myself, not to the level that you have, but he really is amazing, and helping us understand how trauma really impacts us in a different way. I always say trauma isn't always what we think,
Right.
We have this perception that you have to be in a war, and you have to have nightmares, and you have to have all these things, and trauma doesn't always show up that way. Trauma didn't show up that way for me. Trauma showed up for me very somatically, and it showed up from health crisis, not necessarily in flashbacks and things like that. So I think we have to really, like what you said, reimagine how we really look at these things, how we come together with these things. So, because if we don't, we're actually perpetuating the cycle of trauma and we're not actually getting past it. So by reimagining it, by coming together and also healing our own junk. I actually have a class called Bless Your Junk.
Yeah. And Hope Reimagined is, you know, the acronym stands for healing opportunities in playful environments. The goal really is rethinking what is healing for kids and families, and how to really help the collective healing process, while also including some precision medicine, really drilling into what is going to be healing for an individual kid. And when I say medicine, I'm talking about dance, music, equine therapy, martial arts. What is it that's really going to be right for this child?
Yeah, we have to kind of redefine what medicine looks like these days, right? Because it's not always a pill.
It is not always a pill.
Hence why we call this program Triggers in Spiritual Medicine. So thank you, Susan. I wanted to call you Sue again. I forget.
Yeah, no, it was great. It's okay. Anyone who knew me before the age of 16 gets to call me Sue, but everybody else calls me Susan.
Such a
this
pleasure.
Has been such a joy. It really has.
Space with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I look forward to...
I'm so grateful for the work you're doing. It's incredibly important, and I'm glad to be on the journey with you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you so much. All right.